The gunshot echoed across the valley just as Hannah Summers crested the ridge, and she knew with sickening certainty that her father was dead. She'd been gathering firewood near their isolated homestead when she heard the distinctive crack of a rifle, followed by men's voices carried on the wind. Her father had warned her about the Dalton gang operating in this part of Texas, just outside the rough mining town of Terlingua, where they'd settled 3 months prior in the spring of 1883. He told her if trouble came, she should run and not look back. But Hannah wasn't the type to abandon family, so she'd crept through the scrub brush and mesquite trees until she could see their small cabin in the clearing below. 4 men on horseback surrounded the place. Her father lay motionless in the dirt near the well. Hannah pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. She was 18 years old, alone in wild country, and the men who'd killed her father were now ransacking their home. She watched them emerge with her mother's silver locket, the only valuable thing they owned, and the small pouch of coins her father had been saving to expand their ranch. They laughed as they mounted up and rode west toward the Rio Grande. Hannah waited until the dust from their horses had settled before she moved. Her legs felt like water as she stumbled down the slope. She fell twice, scraping her palms on the rocky ground, but she barely noticed. When she reached her father, she already knew. His eyes stared up at the harsh Texas sky, seeing nothing. The bullet had taken him in the chest, quick at least. That was the only mercy in any of this. She had no idea how long she sat there in the dirt, holding his calloused hand. The sun tracked across the sky and the shadows grew long. Finally, as dusk approached, survival instinct kicked in. She couldn't bury him alone, not in this hard ground. She needed help. Terlingua was 3 miles away, maybe more. She'd never made the journey alone, certainly not after dark, but she had no choice. Hannah gathered what she could carry: a blanket, a canteen, her father's hunting knife. She covered his body with an old tarp from the barn, weighting the corners with stones. Then she set out, walking east as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed obscenely beautiful given the circumstances. The temperature dropped fast once darkness fell. Hannah wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and kept walking. She knew these lands weren't safe at night. Mountain lions prowled the rocky outcroppings. Rattlesnakes sought the warmth of the trail. And worse than any animal were the men who used the darkness for cover while they conducted their lawless business. But she had no choice except to keep placing one foot in front of the other. She'd been walking for perhaps an hour when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Panic surged through her veins. Hannah dove off the trail and crouched behind a cluster of prickly pear cactus, trying to make herself invisible. The rider came closer, moving at an easy pace. In the moonlight, she could make out a single man on a dark horse. He wasn't riding like someone running from the law or chasing trouble. Still, she held her breath until he passed. Except he didn't pass. The horse stopped just beyond her hiding place and the man spoke into the darkness. "I know you're there. Heard you walking from a half-mile back. This isn't country for a woman alone after dark." Hannah remained frozen, gripping the knife handle beneath her blanket. The man sighed and she heard the creak of saddle leather as he dismounted. "Look, I'm not going to hurt you. Name's Austin Garrett. I ranch about 2 miles north of here. You need help getting somewhere." There was something in his voice that made her believe him. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was desperation, but Hannah slowly stood up from behind the cactus. In the moonlight, she could see he was tall and lean, wearing a dark hat and duster coat. He kept his hands visible and away from the pistol at his hip. "My father," she said, and her voice cracked. "Men shot him. At our homestead west of here. I'm trying to reach Terlingua." Austin's posture changed immediately. "You're the Summers family. I saw you in town last month. Your father bought feed from the same supplier I use." He stepped closer, and Hannah could make out more details now. He had a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and his eyes reflected concern in the dim light. He looked to be in his mid-20s, weather-worn in the way of men who worked outdoors. "You're saying someone murdered him? The Dalton gang, I think. 4 men. They took what little we had and rode west." The words came out flat. She was beyond tears now, operating on pure survival. Austin's jaw tightened. "You've been walking for how long? Since sundown?" "That's over an hour in the dark with no protection. You could have been killed a dozen different ways." He didn't say it like a criticism, just a statement of fact. "Come on. My place is closer than town. You can rest there tonight, and at first light I'll ride to get the sheriff and the undertaker." Hannah wanted to refuse. She'd been raised to be cautious around strange men, but what choice did she have? She was exhausted, grieving, and still had 2 miles or more to walk in dangerous darkness. "I don't want to impose. It's not an imposition. It's what decent people do." He led his horse closer and held out his hand. "Can you ride? You can take my horse and I'll walk alongside if you prefer." Something about that offer, the way he was willing to walk while she rode, decided her. Hannah accepted his hand and let him help her into the saddle. He handed her the reins and started walking, leading the way north off the main trail. True to his word, he kept a respectful distance and maintained an easy pace. "How long were you and your father in Texas?" Austin asked after a while, probably trying to keep her mind occupied. 3 months. We came from Missouri after my mother died last winter. My father thought we could start fresh out here, build something." She laughed bitterly. "That worked out well. I'm sorry about your mother. And your father. That's a lot of loss for one person to carry." Hannah didn't respond. If she started talking about her parents, she'd fall apart, and she couldn't afford that yet. Austin seemed to understand because he didn't push for more conversation. They walked in silence for another 20 minutes until buildings emerged from the darkness. Austin's ranch was modest, but well-maintained. A sturdy cabin with a covered porch, a barn, and several corrals where horses shifted and nickered at their approach. Everything spoke of a man who took pride in his work and did things right. He helped Hannah dismount and led her toward the cabin. "I don't have much in the way of amenities," he said, pushing open the door. "But it's warm and dry. You can sleep in the bed. I'll take the floor." "I can't take your bed." "Yes, you can. You've had the worst day imaginable and walked miles in the dark. I'll hear no arguments." He struck a match and lit a lantern, illuminating the interior. It was a single large room with a bed in one corner, a table and chairs, a stove and shelves lined with supplies. Clean and organized, the space of a solitary man who'd learned to take care of himself. Austin moved to the stove and began building up the fire. "You should eat something." "When did you last have food?" Hannah tried to remember. "Breakfast, before everything went wrong." "This morning." He pulled out a cast iron pan and started preparing something. Hannah sank into one of the chairs, suddenly aware of how badly her feet hurt, how her whole body ached with exhaustion and grief. She watched Austin work efficiently, slicing bacon and breaking eggs into the pan. The domestic normalcy of it felt surreal. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "You don't know me." Austin glanced over his shoulder. "Out here we help each other or we don't survive. Simple as that. Besides, no one deserves what happened to you today." He plated the food and set it in front of her along with a cup of water. "Eat. You need your strength." Hannah ate mechanically, tasting nothing, but her body needed the fuel, so she forced it down. Austin sat across from her with his own plate, giving her space but remaining present. When she finished, he cleared the dishes and pointed to the bed. "Get some rest." I'll wake you at dawn and we'll ride into town together." Hannah was too exhausted to protest anymore. She lay down fully clothed on top of the blankets, and despite everything, sleep claimed her within minutes. Her last thought was that she'd found unexpected kindness in a stranger, and that gave her the smallest spark of hope in the darkness. She woke to pale light filtering through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For one blissful moment, she'd forgotten everything. Then reality crashed back and she sat up quickly, disoriented. Austin was at the stove, cooking breakfast with the same quiet efficiency as the night before. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee's ready if you want some." Hannah stood on unsteady legs and moved to the table. Austin poured her a cup and she wrapped her hands around the warm tin, letting the heat seep into her palms. "You didn't have to make breakfast. You need to eat before we ride. It's going to be a difficult day." He served her eggs and bacon, along with fresh biscuits that must have taken real effort to prepare. The gesture touched something in her grief-numbed heart. They ate in companionable silence. Austin didn't try to fill the quiet with meaningless words, and Hannah appreciated that. When they finished, he saddled 2 horses, one for each of them. The ride into Terlingua took about 40 minutes in the morning light. Hannah could see the landscape properly now. The harsh beauty of the Chihuahuan Desert with its rocky hills and sparse vegetation. The distant Chizos Mountains purple on the horizon. Terlingua was barely more than a collection of rough buildings clustered around the mercury mines that gave the area its livelihood. A general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of other structures lined the dusty main street. Austin led them to a building with a faded sign reading "Sheriff" and helped Hannah dismount. Sheriff Tom Bradley was a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened intently as Hannah recounted the previous day's events, then as Austin explained how he'd found her on the trail. Bradley took notes and nodded grimly. "Sounds like the Dalton gang, all right. They've been hitting homesteads between here and the river for 2 months now. We've had no luck catching them. They cross into Mexico and disappear." He looked at Hannah with sympathy. "I'm sorry about your father, Miss Summers. We'll ride out to your place and bring him back for proper burial. Austin, you willing to guide us? Of course." "What about the men who killed him?" Hannah asked, her voice harder than she intended. "What about justice? I'll send word to the Rangers. They've got better resources for tracking these gangs than I do, but I won't lie to you, miss. Most of the time, men like that disappear across the border and never answer for what they've done." Bradley stood and reached for his hat. "Let me get the undertaker and a couple deputies. We'll head out within the hour." Hannah spent the wait sitting on a bench outside the sheriff's office, staring at nothing. Austin sat beside her, not touching, just present. When the group was ready to ride, he helped her onto her horse, and they made the somber journey back to her homestead. Seeing her father's body in daylight, preparing him for transport, choosing his burial plot in the small cemetery behind the church, it all passed in a blur of grief. Austin stayed with her through every moment, a steady presence that kept her anchored when she felt like she might float away on waves of sorrow. He paid for the burial plot and the undertaker's services before Hannah could even think about money, and when she tried to protest, he simply shook his head. "You can pay me back later if you insist. Right now, just let someone help you." The funeral was held the next afternoon. Hannah was startled to see how many people attended. Miners and ranchers, shopkeepers and their wives, people she barely knew who'd come to pay respects to a man they'd met only briefly. It spoke to the way frontier communities took care of their own. Austin stood beside her throughout the service, and when she finally broke down and wept, he offered his handkerchief and a supportive hand on her shoulder. After the burial, Several women invited Hannah to stay with them, but she declined. She needed to go back to the homestead, to sort through her father's things and figure out what to do next. Austin insisted on riding back with her, and this time she didn't argue. The cabin looked exactly as she'd left it, but everything felt different now. Hannah walked through the rooms, touching her father's belongings, her mother's few treasured possessions. What was she supposed to do now? She had no family, no money beyond a few dollars, no prospects. The homestead was technically hers, but she couldn't work it alone and she had no funds to hire help. "What will you do?" Austin asked gently, echoing her thoughts. "I don't know." Hannah sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted again. "I suppose I could sell this place, try to find work in town. Maybe as a seamstress or a cook. That's one option." Austin leaned against the doorframe, his hat in his hands. "Or I could make you a proposal. Nothing improper," he added quickly when Hannah's eyes widened. "I need help at my ranch. The work is hard, but I'd pay fair wages and you'd have a safe place to stay. You could keep this land and I'd help you maintain it until you decide what you want to do with it." Hannah stared at him. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "I know you've got backbone. You walked 3 miles in the dark after watching your father die, didn't fall apart until the funeral, and you're already thinking practically about survival. That's more than a lot of people could manage." Austin met her eyes steadily. "I've been working my place alone for 2 years and I could use an extra pair of hands. You need employment and a safe situation. Seems like we could help each other." It was logical. It was practical. It was also the kindest offer anyone had made her. What would people say? A single woman working for a single man. Probably plenty, since people always talk. But anyone who knows me knows I run a respectable operation, and you'd have your own space in the barn loft. I converted it into proper living quarters when my sister visited last year. It's got a good door with a lock, a stove, everything you need." Hannah considered. The alternative was selling everything her father had worked for, moving into a cramped room in town, and scraping by on whatever low wages women's work commanded. At least working for Austin, she'd learn ranching, maintain her father's land, and have room to breathe while she figured out her future. "All right," she said finally. "I'll work for you, but I pay my own way. I won't accept charity." Austin smiled for the first time since she'd met him, and it transformed his weather-worn face into something warmer. "I wouldn't offer charity. I need a ranch hand and you need work. It's a fair exchange." They shook hands on it, and Hannah felt the first stirring of something other than grief in her chest. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just relief at having a path forward. Either way, it was better than the numbness she'd been feeling. Over the next few days, Hannah packed up her essential belongings and moved to Austin's ranch. The loft space was better than she'd expected, with a real bed, a writing desk, and windows that let in good light. Austin gave her time to settle in, then started teaching her the rhythms of ranch work. Hannah had never worked with horses before, but she learned fast. Austin was a patient teacher, showing her how to curry and brush the animals, how to check their hooves, how to recognize signs of illness or injury. He raised and trained horses for sale, keeping about 20 animals at any given time in various stages of training. It was hard physical work, but Hannah found she liked it. The horses didn't judge her or pity her. They simply responded to how she treated them. Austin also taught her to ride properly. She'd ridden a little back in Missouri, but nothing like the skilled horsemanship required out here. He started her on a gentle mare named Daisy and worked with her daily, teaching her balance and control. Hannah had always been athletic, and she took to riding with increasing confidence. The days developed a rhythm. They rose before dawn and worked until midday, when the heat became too oppressive. They'd rest during the hottest hours, then work again in the late afternoon and evening. Austin did the cooking, which surprised Hannah until she tasted his food and realized he was actually quite good at it. "I've been on my own a long time," he explained when she commented on it. "Man can either learn to cook decent food or eat terrible meals for the rest of his life." I chose the former. Slowly, Hannah began to heal. The sharp edge of grief softened into a persistent ache she learned to carry. She started sleeping through the night without nightmares. She found herself laughing at something Austin said while they worked. Life continued as it always did. She also began to notice things about Austin. The way he treated his horses with gentle firmness, never harsh, but always clear about expectations. The way he tipped his hat to every woman they passed in town, regardless of her station. The way he'd sometimes stop work just to watch the sunset, appreciating beauty in a hard land. He was a good man, she realized. Truly good, not just polite or proper, but genuinely kind and decent in ways that mattered. About 3 weeks after she'd started working for him, they were in the barn late one evening, settling the horses for the night. Hannah was brushing down Daisy when Austin spoke from the next stall. "You don't talk much about before. Your life in Missouri." Hannah continued brushing in long, even strokes. "Not much to tell. My father was a farmer. We had a small place, grew wheat mostly. My mother taught me to read and write, some sewing and cooking. It was a quiet life." "You miss it." "I miss my parents. The life," she paused, considering. "No, not really. It was limited. Expected. Marry a local farmer, have children, repeat the cycle. There wasn't room for anything else." "What would you have wanted? If you could have chosen anything?" No one had ever asked her that before. Hannah set down the brush and looked over the stall divider at Austin. "Something more. I don't know what exactly, just more than what was offered. Does that sound ungrateful?" "Sounds honest." Austin finished with his horse and came to lean on the divider near her. "You're smart, Hannah. Quick to learn, good with your hands, not afraid of hard work. You could do a lot of things if you set your mind to it." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "What about you? How does a man end up ranching alone in the middle of nowhere, Texas?" Austin's expression grew distant. "I grew up in San Antonio. My father wanted me to take over his banking business, wear a suit every day, count other people's money. It about suffocated me. When I turned 21, I took my small inheritance, came out here and bought this land. My father disowned me for it. I'm sorry." "Don't be. Best decision I ever made. Some people are built for city life, for business and society. I'm not one of them. I need space and sky and work that means something tangible." He smiled slightly. "My sister understands. She visits when she can, though our father forbids it. She's the only family I care about maintaining." Hannah understood that kind of choosing yourself over expectations. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" "Sometimes," Austin admitted. "But I'd rather be lonely in a place I love than trapped in a place I hate." He looked at her thoughtfully. "What about you? Do you think you'll stay in Texas?" "I don't know where else I'd go. Missouri holds nothing for me now. At least here I have work and a purpose." "And you," she almost added, but caught herself. That was dangerous territory. As summer deepened into its full heat, Hannah and Austin fell into an easy partnership. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with few words. Hannah's skill with the horses grew daily. She had a natural gentleness that the animals responded to, and Austin started trusting her with more advanced training tasks. One evening in late July, a horse trader named Samuel Morrison rode in with news. "Thought you should know, Garrett. The Dalton gang hit another place yesterday. The Henderson family, about 5 miles west of the Summers homestead." Hannah's head snapped up from where she was repairing a bridle. "Was anyone hurt?" Everyone was in town for supplies, thank God, but they burned the house and killed the livestock. Pure meanness. Morrison shook his head. Rangers still haven't caught them. Word is they've got a hideout somewhere in the Chizos Mountains and they come out to raid when they need money. After Morrison left, Hannah couldn't settle. She paced the barn, anger and helplessness warring inside her. Austin watched her for a while before speaking. I know what you're feeling, but you can't go after them. They killed my father. They're terrorizing families. Someone has to do something. The Rangers are doing something. Hunting killers isn't our job. Austin stood and moved closer. Hannah, I understand the need for justice, but revenge will only get you killed, and I don't want to bury another good person. The genuine concern in his voice stopped her pacing. She looked at him and saw real fear in his eyes, fear for her safety. When had that happened? When had they gone from employer and employee to something more? I just feel so useless, she said quietly. You're not useless. You're building a life. That's the best revenge against men like the Daltons. They try to destroy and you keep creating. You keep going. That takes more courage than any gunfight. Hannah knew he was right, but it didn't ease the ache in her chest. Austin must have seen it because he did something unexpected. He pulled her into a hug, careful and respectful, giving her the comfort of human contact without demanding anything. Hannah stiffened for just a moment, then let herself lean into his strength. He smelled like leather and hay and summer sun, and being in his arms felt like the safest place in the world. They stood like that for a long moment before Austin gently released her. Neither of them spoke about it, but something had shifted between them. A line had been crossed, invisible but real. After that evening, the tension between them grew. Nothing inappropriate happened. Austin remained a perfect gentleman. But Hannah caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. She found herself noticing details about him. The way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the strength in his hands as he worked, the rare smile that made her heart beat faster. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. He'd saved her, given her work, treated her with respect. Of course she felt warmth toward him. But late at night in her loft room, she knew it was more than gratitude. She was falling in love with Austin Garrett, and she had no idea what to do about it. The situation came to a head in mid-August. They'd spent the day working with a particularly difficult young stallion that Austin was training for a buyer. The horse was smart but stubborn, testing every boundary. By evening, they were both exhausted and covered in dust. I'm going to wash up at the creek, Austin said, grabbing a towel. You can have the cabin to yourself if you want to heat water for a bath. The creek ran through Austin's property about a quarter-mile from the cabin, a reliable water source that made the land valuable. Hannah appreciated the privacy offer. She heated water on the stove and took a proper bath in the tin tub, washing away days of accumulated grime. She'd just finished dressing in clean clothes when Austin returned. He stopped in the doorway, his hair wet from the creek, his shirt clinging to his frame. They stared at each other for a long moment, and the air between them felt charged with electricity. Hannah, Austin said, his voice rough. We need to talk, her heart hammered. About what? About this. About us. He stepped inside and closed the door, maintaining a respectful distance. I'm trying to be honorable here. You work for me. You've been through hell. The last thing you need is me complicating your life. But I'm failing at pretending I don't have feelings for you. Hannah's breath caught. What kind of feelings? The kind that make me think about you every moment of the day. The kind that make me want to build something permanent instead of just existing. The kind that scare me because I've never felt them before. Austin ran a hand through his damp hair. I'm saying this badly. What I mean is, I'm falling in love with you, and I needed you to know before I do something stupid like kiss you without permission. Joy burst through Hannah's chest like sunrise. "What if I want you to kiss me?" Austin's eyes widened. "You do?" Instead of answering, Hannah closed the distance between them and reached up to touch his face. His skin was warm beneath her palm, his stubble rough against her fingers. "You've been nothing but kind to me since the worst day of my life. You've given me work and shelter and respect. You've taught me skills and made me feel capable again. You've never once made me feel like I owe you anything. How could I not fall in love with you?" Austin made a sound that was half laugh, half groan, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But Hannah had no intention of breaking. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the feeling she'd been suppressing for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right. Court you properly. Ask your father's permission, except—" He trailed off, realizing what he'd said. "Except my father is gone." Hannah's eyes stung, but she blinked back the tears. "He would have liked you, though. He always said to judge a man by his actions, not his words. Your actions have shown me exactly who you are." "Then I'm asking you, Hannah Summers, if you'll let me court you with the intention of marriage. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. But out here, life is short and uncertain. When you find something good, you hold on to it." Hannah thought about all the reasons she should say no. They barely knew each other. She was still grieving. People would talk. But she also thought about how alive she felt when she was with him, how right it felt to work beside him, how much she wanted to build a future in this harsh, beautiful land. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll let you court me." Austin's smile was brilliant. He kissed her again, and this time there was joy in it, a celebration of possibility. When they finally separated, he kept his arms around her waist. "I should let you get some rest," he said, though he made no move to release her. "You should," Hannah agreed, not moving either. They stood like that for a while longer, just holding each other, before finally acknowledging the propriety of the situation. Austin kissed her forehead and stepped back. "Tomorrow, I'm riding into town and buying you a proper courting gift. And I'm going to tell anyone who asks that you're spoken for. People will definitely talk. Let them. I don't care what anyone thinks as long as you're happy." Hannah watched him head to his bedroll with a lightness in her heart she hadn't felt since before her mother died. Despite everything she'd lost, she'd found something precious in this unlikely place. She'd found love and hope and the promise of a future worth fighting for. True to his word, Austin rode into Terlingua the next day and returned with a beautiful turquoise necklace set in silver, the kind of jewelry the local craftsman made from stones mined in the area. He fastened it around Hannah's neck with gentle hands, and she treasured it as much for the thoughtfulness as for its beauty. Word spread quickly in their small community. Some people were scandalized by the speed of their courtship. Others, knowing both their characters, approved. The women who attended church were split in their opinions, but Hannah found she didn't care. She knew her own heart, and she knew Austin's character. That was enough. They continued working the ranch together, but now there were stolen kisses in the barn and long conversations under the stars. Austin told her about his dreams of expanding the ranch, maybe raising cattle along with horses. Hannah shared her own dreams, which had started to include a future in Texas, a home she could build and fill with love. One evening in September, as they sat on the cabin porch watching the sun set over the distant mountains, Austin said, "I've been thinking about your father's land. What if we combined it with mine? We could build it into something substantial. Not huge, but big enough to support a family." "A family," Hannah's heart raced. "Eventually, if that's something you want. I'm not trying to rush you, but I think about the future a lot these days, and you're in every vision of it." Hannah took his hand, threading her fingers through his. I think about the future too. And yes, someday I'd like a family. Children who grow up knowing they're loved and safe, who have room to become whoever they're meant to be. Then we'll build that together, one step at a time. The weeks passed in a glow of happiness. Hannah had never felt more content. The work was hard but satisfying. The land was harsh but beautiful. And Austin was everything she'd never known to hope for in a partner. Steady, kind, passionate about his work, and deeply respectful of her opinions and capabilities. In early October, everything changed again. A Texas Ranger named Captain William Sterling rode into the ranch one afternoon, looking grim. Austin and Hannah met him in the yard, immediately tense at his expression. "Mr. Garrett, Miss Summers," Sterling tipped his hat. "I need to speak with you both about the Dalton gang." They invited him inside and offered coffee, which he accepted gratefully. Once they were all seated, Sterling pulled out a worn notebook. "We've been tracking the Daltons for months. We finally located their hideout in a canyon near the Chizos. 3 days ago we raided it." He paused. "All 4 men are dead. They chose to fight rather than surrender." Hannah felt a complicated rush of emotions, relief, satisfaction, grief that violence was the only resolution. "It's over then, it's over. I wanted you to know personally, Miss Summers, since they killed your father. We recovered some stolen property from their hideout. Most of it couldn't be traced, but we found this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver locket on a delicate chain. "Does this belong to you?" Hannah's hand shook as she took it. "It was my mother's. My grandmother gave it to her on her wedding day." She opened the locket to reveal the tiny portraits inside, her mother as a young woman, her father handsome and smiling. Seeing their faces brought tears to her eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss," Sterling said quietly. "Your father was a good man. He didn't deserve what happened. No, he didn't." Hannah closed the locket carefully. "But thank you for bringing this back. It means more than you know." After Sterling left, Hannah sat holding the locket for a long time. Austin sat beside her, his presence a comfort even in silence. Finally, she spoke. "I thought I'd feel more, satisfaction or vengeance or something, but I just feel tired." "Justice isn't the same as revenge," Austin said. "It brings closure, not joy. But maybe now you can really move forward without that weight hanging over you." Hannah nodded slowly. He was right. Knowing the men who'd killed her father had faced consequences did bring a sense of completion. The chapter of her life that had begun with such tragedy could finally close. A new chapter could begin. She stood and moved to the shelf where Austin kept a few precious items. She placed the locket there, next to a photograph of his sister and a rock he'd found on his first day on the ranch. Her past and his present, side by side. "I'm ready to move forward," she said, turning back to him. "Completely forward, with you." Austin stood and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to wait anymore. I'm saying I want to marry you, build that future we talked about, combine our lives and our lands and make something lasting." "Hannah Summers, are you proposing to me?" Austin's eyes sparkled with amusement and love. "What if I am? Is that too forward for propriety? To hell with propriety." Austin kissed her thoroughly. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you, tomorrow if you'll have me." Hannah laughed, the sound free and genuine. "Maybe not tomorrow, I'd like to do it properly, but soon. Before winter, Austin agreed. "That gives us about 6 weeks. Think we can plan a wedding in that time, interlingua? I think we can manage." They were married on a crisp November morning in the small church, with half the town in attendance. Hannah wore a simple cream-colored dress that one of the local women had helped her make, with her mother's locket around her neck and a crown of late-season wildflowers in her hair. Austin wore his best clothes and looked more nervous than she'd ever seen him, which she found endearing. Sheriff Bradley gave her away, a kind gesture from a man who'd shown compassion during her darkest hour. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When Austin slipped the gold band on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Hannah felt her mother and father watching over them, blessing this union born from tragedy but built on genuine love. The reception was held at the saloon, which the owner had cleaned up for the occasion. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Hannah danced with her husband, with the sheriff, with several of the ranchers who'd become friends. She felt light and free and hopeful in ways she'd forgotten were possible. As the sun began to set, Austin swept her into his arms and carried her out to their wagon amid cheers and good-natured teasing. They rode back to the ranch together, now officially theirs, and began their married life. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and life in intimate ways. But Austin was patient and tender, and Hannah found joy in their partnership. They worked the combined ranch land together, planning improvements and expansion. Austin taught Hannah everything he knew about horses, and she proved to have an intuitive understanding of the animals that sometimes exceeded his own. Winter in the Chihuahuan desert was mild compared to Missouri winters, but they still had cold nights where they huddled close to the fire. Austin told stories of his adventures before settling down, and Hannah shared memories of her parents that no longer hurt quite so much to speak. They talked about everything: their beliefs, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. In February, Hannah realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She'd seen her mother struggle through pregnancies, knew the risks women faced. But she also wanted children with Austin, wanted to fill their home with love and laughter. When she told him, Austin's face went through a dozen emotions in seconds: shock, elation, fear, wonder. Then he kissed her and held her carefully as if she might break. "We're having a baby," he whispered against her hair. "We're going to be parents. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, but happy. He pulled back to look at her. "We'll hire help for the heavy work. You're not lifting anything heavier than a bucket of water from now on." Hannah laughed at his overprotectiveness, but she also appreciated his concern. They did hire a young man named Peter to help with the ranch work, which gave Hannah time to prepare for the baby. The women in town rallied around her, teaching her what to expect, helping her sew tiny clothes, sharing wisdom passed down through generations. As her belly grew, so did their dreams. Austin built a cradle from oak wood, carving it with careful detail. Hannah stitched quilts and gowns. They argued good-naturedly about names and speculated endlessly about whether it would be a boy or a girl. In late September 1884, on a night when the desert stars blazed brilliant overhead, Hannah went into labor. Mrs. Henderson, the midwife, had moved into the cabin 3 days prior, knowing the time was near. Austin paced outside for hours, helpless and anxious, while the women worked inside. When he finally heard the sharp cry of an infant, he nearly fell to his knees in relief. Mrs. Henderson emerged with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Garrett, a strong, healthy boy, and your wife came through like a champion." Austin burst into the cabin to find Hannah exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in the quilt she'd made. The baby had dark hair and was waving miniature fists in the air, already angry at the world. Austin approached slowly, awestruck. "Meet your son," Hannah said softly, her eyes shining with tears of joy and exhaustion. Austin carefully took the baby, his large, work-roughened hands surprisingly gentle. The infant quieted immediately, as if recognizing his father's touch. "He's perfect," Austin breathed. "You're perfect." "You did this, Hannah," You're incredible." They named him Thomas Edward Garrett after both their fathers, but called him Tommy from the start. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's determination and his mother's temperament. Austin was a natural father, patient and devoted, changing diapers and walking the floor at night without complaint. As Tommy grew, the ranch prospered. They expanded their horse operation and added a small cattle herd. Hannah proved to have a good head for the business side of things, keeping books and managing sales with skill. They became known throughout the region for quality horses and fair dealing. When Tommy was 2, Hannah became pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, more confident. Their daughter, Rose Ann Garrett, was born in spring 1887 with her mother's blonde hair and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone she met. Tommy was initially skeptical of this tiny person who'd invaded his world, but quickly became fiercely protective of his little sister. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, hardship and joy. There were difficult years when drought made water scarce and they had to fight for every blade of grass. There were good years when the rains came at the right times and the horses sold for premium prices. Through it all, Hannah and Austin faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. When Tommy was 6 and Rose 4, the children started attending the small school that had been built in Terlingua. Hannah often went to town with them, becoming active in the church and community groups. She and Austin became respected members of the growing community, known for their integrity and willingness to help neighbors in need. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Austin turned to Hannah with a thoughtful expression. "You ever think about that night, when I found you on the trail?" "Sometimes," Hannah admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago and yesterday at the same time. I think about it often, how close we came to never meeting. If I'd ridden out an hour later, if you'd chosen a different path, if any of 100 things had been different." He took her hand. "I don't believe in luck or fate particularly, but I'm grateful for whatever brought us together." Hannah squeezed his hand. "I walked 3 miles in the dark that night, desperate and alone. I never could have imagined I'd find not just help, but everything I'd ever wanted. A home, a purpose, a family, love. You walked into my life and changed everything," Austin said. "I was content before, but you made me happy. You made me whole." They watched Tommy chase Rose around the yard, her squeals of laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The sun painted the desert in shades of gold and amber, the same colors as the morning Austin had made Hannah breakfast after the worst night of her life. She'd woken to find food prepared, to find kindness offered, to find a man who would become her everything. "I need to tell you something," Hannah said suddenly, "something I've never properly said." Austin looked at her curiously. "What's that?" "Thank you. For that first night, for the breakfast, for every moment since. You saved me, Austin, not just my life but my soul. You gave me reason to keep going when I had none, and you've given me a life more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible." Austin's eyes grew bright with emotion. "You don't need to thank me. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening sky. Tommy and Rose tired of their game and climbed onto the porch, Rose settling in Hannah's lap while Tommy leaned against Austin's shoulder. A family, complete and content, carved from tragedy and built on love. Over the years that followed, their family continued to grow in ways both expected and surprising. They had one more child, another boy they named Samuel, born when Tommy was 9 and Rose 7. Samuel was the quiet one, thoughtful and observant, with a gift for working with animals that surpassed even his father's skills. The ranch expanded, until it was one of the most successful operations in the region. Tommy, as he grew, showed interest in the business side, helping his mother with the books and accompanying his father to cattle auctions and horse sales. Rose proved to have her mother's practical nature and her father's way with horses, becoming an accomplished rider who could train even the most difficult animals. Samuel simply loved the land itself, spending hours exploring every corner of the ranch, learning every plant and animal, becoming as much a part of the desert as the rocks and sky. Hannah and Austin grew older together, their faces gaining lines and their hair showing gray, but their love never diminishing. They still worked side by side, though they hired more help as the years passed. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching sunsets and talking about everything and nothing. They still reached for each other in the night, finding comfort and passion in their bond. The homestead where Hannah's father died remained part of their property. As Tommy approached manhood, Austin and Hannah decided to build a proper house there for him, preparing for the day when he'd want to start his own family. They made it a project the whole family worked on together, creating something lasting from a place of pain. On the day they finished the new house, Hannah stood in the doorway looking out at the land her father had chosen. So much had changed since that terrible day in 1883. She'd changed, transformed from a frightened girl into a confident woman, a wife, a mother, a successful rancher in her own right. But she'd never forgotten where she came from or the price that had been paid. "Are you all right?" Austin appeared beside her, reading her mood as he always could. "I was thinking about my father, how he brought me here hoping for a fresh start, and how he never got to see what we built. I wish he could have known you, known his grandchildren. I think he would have been proud. I think he would have been too, and I think, wherever he is, he knows. He knows his daughter didn't just survive, but thrived. That's what parents want most for their children." Hannah leaned into her husband's solid presence. "You think we've done that for our children, given them everything they need to thrive? I think we've given them love, security, skills, and the space to become themselves. The rest is up to them." Austin wrapped an arm around her waist. "But yes, I think we've done well. Look at them." Hannah looked to where their 3 children were racing horses across the open land, whooping with joy and freedom. Tommy was in the lead on his favorite stallion, but Rose was gaining ground and Samuel was taking a different route entirely, finding his own path as he always did. They were healthy, happy, and capable. They knew who they were and what they wanted. They'd never had to walk 3 miles in the dark, desperate and alone. That night, the whole family stayed at the new house, breaking it in properly. They cooked dinner together and ate by lamplight, telling stories and laughing. Later, after the children had bedded down, Austin and Hannah stepped outside to look at the stars. "You remember what you told me once?" Hannah asked. "About some people being built for city life and some for this." "I remember. I think I was always built for this. I just didn't know it. The open sky, the hard work, the freedom to be more than what was expected. I think I was always meant to end up here." "And I was always meant to find you," Austin said, pulling her close. "To wake up one morning and realize that the woman I'd helped on the trail had become the center of my entire world." "You woke to find breakfast made," Hannah said softly, remembering. "I'd walked 3 miles in the dark just to thank you somehow, and you gave me everything." "No," Austin corrected gently. "You gave me everything. You gave me love, a family, a purpose beyond myself. You took a lonely man living alone on a patch of hard Texas ground and turned his house into a home. You're the gift, Hannah. You always were." They stood together under the vast Texas sky, the same sky that had witnessed their first meeting, their courtship, their wedding, the births of their children, and every moment of joy and struggle between. The desert wind whispered across the land they'd built together, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons in West Texas. The children grew into adults, each finding their own path while remaining connected to the family ranch and to each other. Tommy married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth and built a life at the homestead house, raising horses and eventually giving Hannah and Austin their first grandchildren. Rose surprised everyone by becoming one of the region's most respected horse trainers, working with wealthy buyers from as far away as California. She married late, at 30, to a veterinarian named James who supported her independence and shared her love of animals. Samuel never married, content to roam the ranch lands, eventually writing a book about the flora and fauna of the Chihuahuan Desert that became a standard reference for naturalists. Hannah and Austin watched their family grow and flourish with deep satisfaction. They celebrated births and mourned losses, as life brought its inevitable mixture of joy and sorrow. They attended church socials and town meetings, contributed to building schools and roads, became elders in a community they'd helped shape. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1909, their children organized a celebration that brought together friends and family from across the region. Hannah wore her mother's locket, now a treasured heirloom she'd passed to Rose. Austin wore the turquoise bolo Ty Hannah had made for him on their 10th anniversary, crafted from a stone matching her courting necklace. As they danced together in the barn they'd cleaned and decorated for the occasion, Austin whispered in her ear, "25 years, and I love you more now than the day we married." "That's because you know all my faults now and love me anyway," Hannah teased. "That's because I've had 25 years to discover all the ways you're remarkable, and I'm still finding new ones." Austin spun her gently, mindful of their ages. "You're my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. Everything good in my world traces back to you." Hannah blinked back happy tears. "We've built something good, haven't we? Against all odds from such a terrible beginning, we built something beautiful and lasting. We did, and it's not finished yet. We've got years ahead of us still." He was right. They did have more years together, though not as many as they might have hoped. Age and hard living took their toll. Austin developed arthritis that made ranch work increasingly difficult. Hannah's eyesight began to fail, forcing her to give up the detailed record-keeping she'd always managed. But they adapted, accepting help from their children and grandchildren, finding new ways to contribute and stay active. They marked their 30th anniversary in 1914 with a quiet dinner, just the two of them, at the cabin that had been their first real home together. They'd built a larger house years ago to accommodate their growing family, but they'd kept the original cabin, and occasionally they'd spend a night there, remembering their early years. "If you could go back," Austin asked as they sat by the fire, "knowing everything that would happen, would you change anything?" Hannah thought about it seriously. "I'd save my father if I could. That pain never entirely goes away, but everything else, no. Every struggle taught us something. Every hardship made us stronger. Every joy was sweeter because we'd known sorrow. Would you walk those 3 miles again? In the dark, alone, not knowing what you'd find?" "In a heartbeat," Hannah said without hesitation. "Because I'd find you, I'd find this life. I'd find everything that matters." Austin reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis. "I'd ride out every night of my life if I knew I'd find you waiting at the end of the trail." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. Outside, the Texas night was alive with sounds. Coyotes calling, cattle lowing, the wind moving through the cottonwoods near the creek. the sounds of home. In the spring of 1918, Austin fell ill with pneumonia. Despite Hannah's devoted care and the doctor's best efforts, he didn't recover. He died peacefully in their bed with Hannah holding his hand, their children and several grandchildren gathered around. His last words were, "I love you, Hannah Summers. Best decision I ever made was riding out that night to find you." Hannah's grief was profound but not destructive. She'd known love, true and deep, for 35 years. She'd shared a life partnership that most people never experienced. And she was surrounded by the legacy they'd built together. Children who were good people, grandchildren who carried their values forward, a ranch that would continue for generations. She continued living at the ranch for another 12 years, remaining active and engaged with her family and community. She taught her grandchildren to ride and shared stories of the early days in West Texas, preserving the history for future generations. She wore Austin's wedding ring on a chain around her neck, next to her mother's locket, carrying the people she'd loved closest to her heart. On a warm evening in late September 1930, Hannah sat on the porch of the original cabin, looking out at the land she and Austin had worked together. She was 85 years old, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who'd come to celebrate her birthday. She felt tired but content, ready for whatever came next. That night, she dreamed of walking in the darkness, not frightened this time but purposeful. She saw a light ahead and moved toward it. As she got closer, she recognized the figure waiting for her. Austin, young and strong as he'd been the night they met, his hand extended to help her. "Took you long enough," he said with that rare smile she'd always loved. "I've been waiting." "I had things to finish," Hannah replied, taking his hand. "But I'm here now. Then let's go home." They walked together into the light, two souls reunited, their love story complete but eternal. Behind them, in the world they'd left, their family continued the work they'd started, building on the foundation of love, resilience, and partnership that Hannah and Austin had established. The ranch prospered. The grandchildren had children of their own. The story was told and retold, of how a tragedy led to a blessing, of how 3 miles walked in darkness led to a lifetime of light. And on quiet evenings, when the Texas wind blew just right across the land they'd loved, some said you could hear laughter and see 2 figures riding across the distant hills, forever young, forever together, forever home.